Our guest today is the president of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA. He has served in that position for 4 years. Our guest today is a native of the state of Washington. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the University of Washington, where, as I mentioned, he later served as president. Our guest today earned both his master's degree and a PhD in public administration from Syracuse University. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Emmert. Mark? All right.
I have a habit of wandering, so is this working? No? There. Now? Okay, good. Sorry, I'm a pacer. Well, first of all, it's great to be back here again. I was here almost exactly 2 years ago. There's been nothing going on in the NCAA since then. So we just said, could we just roll the tape from last time? It's obviously been an amazing couple of years since I was last here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about it and leaving time to answer your questions. I also really appreciate, Father, the invocation. Anytime that you ask a blessing on me and the Blackhawks in the same sentence, I'm feeling pretty good about that. That's good company. And we certainly know that we could use a lot of blessings these days with all of the interesting challenges going on. It is also true that I was president of the University of Washington. The Huskies, for those of you that don't know it, are purple and gold. So as much as I love Northwestern, this is actually a Washington tie. And despite what people might think, Richard Riviere and I are great friends, even though he was at Oregon and just beat the snot out of us every game in football. We still get along because I know that the lifetime record is the Huskies are still way ahead in total wins. So, but the number's changing fast, so we got to fix that problem. As I was actually thinking about my talk to you all today last night, because in Indianapolis last night we hosted my favorite event of the year. It's something that we simply call the Women of the Year event. And the Women of the Year is an event where we bring in 30 young women, student athletes, who represent 10 from each of the three divisions, 1, 2, and 3. So they come from small liberal arts schools to big public universities and everything in between, from the Ivies and from everywhere else. And these young women are nominated by their school and their conference to compete for this award. And it's based not just on their athleticism. They're all stunningly good athletes. Typically, their teams have won championships, or they're All-Americans in their sport, or whatever the amazing accomplishment is. They're also all incredibly good students. They have virtually all of them are going on to postgraduate degrees, PhD programs, med school, whatever, business school. Anything that they're doing right now is pretty amazing, or they've moved into professional lives. A few of them are still involved in athletics at an Olympic level or a professional level, but mostly they've moved on to do other things in life. And then they're also selected because of things they've done with their communities, the kind of leaders that they were on their campuses, the kind of involvement they had. I think this is creaking because of your dance, man. I think you... Well, all right. There we go. And the comment was, it's as sturdy as the NCAA. So the winner of this contest, are all 30 of these women, but the winner of this award is always just an amazingly good student athlete. It happened to go this year to a Notre Dame alumna who's now, she was a soccer player, she was All-American, she was captain of the team, she's now with McKinsey here in Chicago, just a really, really impressive young woman. But it could have been any of the 30 of them, frankly. I mean, you could just draw lots and grab any of these women and you just say, that's what college sports is all about. You just hold them up and say, this is what we strive for. It's what college sports has always been about, is providing a framework within which student athletes can be three-way winners. Compete as effectively at the highest level they're capable of on the field or on the court or whatever their sport is. Allow them to have an opportunity to be as successful as they possibly can be in the classroom and provide them with just the kind of opportunities that you would like for anyone to succeed in their classes and academically and with all their other activities. And then third, make sure that they're successful in life, that these are people that are going to be launched down in the world and do all the things that you want them to do. And the reason I love that event last night is that virtually none of the kids, I still call them kids, these women are household names because virtually none of them compete in one of two sports. None of them were football players, and none of them were men's basketball players. And when you think about what you all and most people know about college sports, we know it from what happens on TV on a Saturday afternoon in the fall, right, during football, and the basically 50 or 60 teams that you see on a typical Saturday on national TV. And you know it from the men's basketball teams that play during our tournament, during the men's basketball championship, those 68 or so teams that are in that tournament. That's what almost everybody in America thinks about when you say college sports. And that's natural enough. That's what's promoted out there. That's what everybody then forms all their impressions about what college sports is all about. And for anybody that thinks about doing research, here's the problem with that model. When you pay attention to that part and say, oh, I know everything there is to know about the NCAA because I watch TV, you're watching 3% of the student athletes. You're missing 97% of what goes on in college sports. 97%. So all of the assumptions are based around watching and knowing 3%. Now that 3% is incredibly popular. That 3% is where all the money is, or at least the great majority of the money. And the 3%, that 3% is where most of the athletes that are going to turn pro in their sport come from. It's still a tiny proportion. So if you're watching football and you want to see who's going in the draft, you're watching those football teams. If you want to know who is going to be part of the 60 kids that go into the NBA draft, you can watch, those teams. But you're getting this tiny, tiny sliver of what college sports is all about. There are now this year 470,000 young men and women playing NCAA sports, closing in on 500,000 kids playing NCAA sports. I love the comparisons when people look at college sports, look at the NCAA, and they'll say, oh, it kind of reminds you of the NFL. It's like it's just all about professional football, and it's just the same. And, I love to chat with Roger Goodell about this, who I think the world of, by the way. He's a terrific guy. And I was chatting with him just the other day here in Chicago. And we were chatting about our jobs, and, he has 30 teams. I forget what he has. 32 NFL teams. How many NCAA teams are there? 19,000. There are 19,000 NCAA teams. There's 30 NBA teams and 32 NFL teams. The comparison between the two is just starkly different when you think about that. I don't know how many total NFL players are there? What is there on a team? 60, 63. Yeah, times 30, 32. So you can do the math. It's, not very many. 470,000 college athletes playing NCAA sports at any given point in time. So when I was at that event last night, watching these incredible kids, it always strikes me that, that's the real representation of what goes on in college sports, not the 3%. Now, the 3%, the other piece of this conversation that's often confused is the 3% also are critically important because, as I said, that's the part that generates all the media revenue and all the ticket revenue that, by the way, pays for and supports the other 97%. So when you look at the huge numbers of top-line revenue that the football championships and the football media contracts produce and our basketball tournament produces, everyone looks at that top-line revenue and says, wow, this is really amazing because we've got all these schools making all of these millions and billions of dollars, and every school in America is participating in sports because they make so much money at it. How's Roosevelt doing that? How's DePaul doing making money? Not just okay. Last year, There are 1,100 colleges and universities in the United States that play NCAA sports. 1,100 that have those 470,000 kids and the 19,000 teams. 22 of the 1,100 last year had positive cash flow in their sports team. 22. Virtually every school in America takes money out of the rest of their institution to support their sports program, not the other way around. Almost no school makes money playing college sports. It's fascinating that you've got this interesting enterprise where 3% of the student competitors are involved in a sport that generates revenue that supports everything else, and that in virtually all cases, universities, except for some number in the 20s this year, are all subsidizing the activity as well, because it's that important. So again, it led me back to, well, last night, these kids, what is that all about? Why are they doing this? Why? Because, the ad we've run and keep running that says, if we have 470,000 kids, almost all who go pro in something other than sports, it's absolutely true. Tiny, tiny fraction of those 470,000, less than 1%, probably a half of a percent, will play professional sports, let alone make a career out of it. It's tiny, tiny outliers. The vast majority of them go on to become doctors and lawyers and dentists and teachers and wind up at the City Club, just like everybody else does that played college sports in their life. But we have this phenomenon right now where we do have a handful of conferences, 5 of them, that have a very large bucket of revenue. They generate revenue from the college football playoffs, from their college football and basketball media rights, and it produces a lot of money. The NCAA, by the way, has nothing to do with football money. People are always asking me, what are you going to do with all the football playoff money? It doesn't come to the NCAA. It stays with the conferences. It gets distributed among the conferences, just like all the bowl revenue does and all the regular season media rights and ticket revenue does. That's the way the NCAA members, the 1,100 colleges, want it. So you have a handful of schools making a lot of revenue, and the revenue has exploded over the past 20 years. But there's one part of this that hasn't changed in 40 years. And that's the nature of an NCAA Division I athletic scholarship. It's still the same model that it has always been. And there's a lot of discussion right now that I'm sure you've followed, particularly but not exclusively among those 5 conferences, that they need to do more to support student athletes, where they have resources to do it and where it makes sense. And I couldn't agree more. This is something we've been talking about since the summer of 2011. I guess that's 2011. Since 2011, there's been a lot of discussion, debate, and consideration of how we can get that done and what we ought to do. And I, along with a lot of university presidents, and a lot of athletic directors and commissioners and others, especially among those 5 conferences, but again, not exclusively, by a long shot, are hoping that in the coming weeks and months, frankly, we can make a number of changes in what the relationship is between schools and student athletes. And this is part of what's been in the newspaper a lot right now. And I'll get around to pay for play because that's a fundamentally different notion and something that there's virtually no support for among people in intercollegiate athletics. But there is a notion for changing this relationship with student athletes, that there ought to be a new 21st century commitment that goes both ways between students and universities and colleges. And that commitment needs to focus on the kinds of things I was just talking about with those women from last night. That we've got to make sure that student athletes have all the things they need to be successful academically, athletically, and in life. First on that list is we've got to make sure that we've got the right, and these issues, by the way, have been consistent with the NCAA for 100 years. First and foremost, we've got to make sure that we've got the right policies and practices around health and wellness for student athletes. We've got to make sure that students are being taken care of as effectively and appropriately as we know. We've got to make sure that the guidelines and policies and practices that are in place are real evidence-based, fact-based understanding of what injuries and other health issues occur and how they occur. So the NCAA right now, for example, is doing a $30 million study in conjunction with the Department of Defense around concussions, because while we talk a lot about concussions, and we all have a lot of concern about it, science doesn't actually know, as medical doctors say, the history of concussion. We don't really have a good understanding of even a definition of what a concussion is. There's no biomarkers for understanding when you have a concussion. We're still diagnosing them pretty much like they were diagnosed when we were playing sports and got dinged. We need to get much, much better. We, society, need to get much, much better at it. And we're committed to doing that. We're committed to then making sure that we've got protocols and practices in place that every school understands and follows. Concussion protocols need to be practiced every bit as much as the Hail Mary pass that's practiced every Thursday at the end of practice. Everybody needs to know if there's a suspected concussion, here's our protocols on the sideline. Here's what the docs do. Here's what the trainers do. Here's what the coaches do. Here's how this works. We need to make sure that that functions and it works well. And we need to have systems for making sure that everybody's held accountable for those things. We understand it and get it. We got to make sure that we understand all the other disorders that go on around college sports. Young women are having far too many knee injuries. We don't know why. We know that ACL injuries and other knee injuries are occurring at a high rate. We've got to fix that. We've got to find out what's that all about. Are we not getting the right kind of training? Are we not getting the right kind of rehab? Do we need to change playing rules? What's going on here? Do we have too much early specialization and we're just getting repetitive use injuries? What's happening in a variety of sports? We've got to do that. Lastly, in this whole area of health and wellness, we've got to make sure we understand something that's becoming an increasing phenomenon on our campuses generally, but also among athletes, and that's mental health issues. Youngsters are showing up today on campuses with more stress and strain on them than probably ever before, and then you add on top of that the demands of being an elite athlete at any division. And it's a hard slog, and we hear from athletic directors, from students themselves, from a lot of coaches that they got kids that are just struggling, and we need to find ways that we can be better about that. But first and foremost, in this commitment to our students, we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of their physical health and well-being. And that includes making sure that we've got great insurance models so that a student athlete doesn't have to pay out of pocket for or his or her family for an injury that's a sports-related injury. Including we've got to find a sensible model for post-eligibility, that if someone has an injury that surfaces in a year or 2 or 3 after they've played, how are we going to manage that? We may not be able, it may not make sense to do it 20 years, but after post-eligibility, what does that model look like? And a lot of schools are wrestling with this right now, but we've got to make sure that that's taken care of. At the NCAA level, we have, at our national office level, we have catastrophic injury insurance that covers someone from debilitating injuries, but we need to figure out, because there's enough money sloshing around here to say, why do we want a kid to have a copay for a knee that got hurt when she was on our soccer fields? That doesn't make sense. We've got to take care of that piece. Health and wellness, first of all. Second of all, we've got to make sure, as part of this commitment, that we're providing everything that a student-athlete needs to be successful in the classroom and academically. Now, we do a marvelous job on virtually every campus that I've visited, which is hundreds of campuses, in doing a lot in that regard. The University of Oregon's Academic Center is the best in the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's spectacular, the investment that they're making in helping their student athletes get educated. That's critical. But we've also got to make sure that we've got the appropriate requirements in place for making sure that students understand what they have to do, coaches understand what they have to do, the school and the team understands what they have to do. We've made great strides in that in the past couple of years. We've got to continue to work on that. We've got to make sure that student athletes know that their scholarship is secure and that our goal is to have them finish a degree. Not have 4 years of eligibility or 5 years of eligibility, but finish a degree. That's the goal and the aspiration. And they shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they're not going to have a scholarship. And so one of the things that's being discussed broadly now, we changed the rules back in 2011 to allow multi-year scholarships. Before that, you weren't even permitted to offer a kid a multi-year scholarship. It had to be a year-by-year scholarship. Now you're allowed to make it a multi-year scholarship, and a number of schools and a number have already committed to saying, no, if we commit to you to come be an athlete with us, you follow the rules, you do what you need to do in the classroom, you're here, and you got a scholarship until you finish up your eligibility. And we also need to say, if post-eligibility, you need a little more time to come back and finish, great, fine, no problems. If you go try out for the league and it doesn't work out, you want to come back and finish your degree, you may not be able to play anymore because you used up your eligibility, that's okay, come back and finish your degree. That's the goal. Yeah, every team wants to win a championship. God knows I loved it when my teams did. But at the same time, the goal is make sure that this young man or woman walks across stage and gets a diploma. Got to make sure also that they have the kind of support systems in place that give them the proper guidance, that give them the opportunity to be supportive in the classroom. It is very, very demanding to be a student athlete, especially at D1 and D2 programs. D3 schools have slightly less demands on student athletes, but they're increasing also. And so we got to make sure that everybody involved is focused on getting a degree, getting a legitimate degree in a legitimate program that they can then go out into the world. And the third part is that. The third part is making sure that when student athletes finish, that we've committed to helping them launch their career and be good citizens. We got to make sure, first on that list, that they have time to enjoy the benefits of a great university, that they can participate in the things that help all of us be successful. They got a chance to get an internship. They got a chance to maybe study abroad if they wanted to. They've got a chance to develop the kind of skills that are also, besides all the great things they learn as an athlete, that are going to allow them to get a job. And it's a much harder row to hoe when you're a full-time student athlete at a major program and committing to your season, to go out and do those things. We've got to make sure that we're backing down those commitments for student athletes when they're involved as athletes. Secondly, we got to make sure that we're providing, and again, most schools do this, but we got to make sure that it's out there, that we're providing the kinds of life skills and educational support that goes beyond the classroom that student athletes need, including understanding their own commitments about behavior, that they are being supported and trained by our athletic programs, not just on how to practice and how to play, but also how to be good citizens, how to take care of all the expectations that they're going to have in life after they finish and while they're off the field and around in society. We have an obligation to make sure that we do that. And thirdly and lastly, we need to make sure that we're also helping them after they leave school. So I know what DePaul does. You guys have a fabulous program to help your student athletes get launched. It's exemplary. So, but not everybody is as good about that as they should be. When a young man or a young woman wants to go out and seek a job, and they've been spending a huge amount of time working on their sport, they may not have the business connections that a typical student has. They may not be able to say, here's what I've been doing, here's what I haven't been doing, but what they have been doing is fabulous, and how do you, as an athletic department in a university, help that person go out and be connected with the world out there when they go out and start all of their professional life? In all three of those areas, this commitment's got to be really clear. We're going to take care of your health and well-being. We're going to make sure you have every opportunity to be successful in the classroom. And by the way, on that score, we need to cover the full cost of attendance in many cases. Right now, the scholarships don't cover all of the legitimate costs that a student may have. And so one of the big debates is, can they cover the full cost of attendance? Can they cover the miscellaneous expenses like travel to and from home, like clothing, like a handful of other things that everybody that's ever had a kid go through college knows goes beyond tuition fees, room, board, books, and supplies? Can you cover the full cost of that scholarship? Because again, a student athlete has a challenge working part-time jobs and doing the things that regular students can do. So we got to do everything we can to make sure that student athlete's got a secure scholarship, that if they do what they need to do, it's there, that they can graduate, that the focus is on that when they get around to their academics. And then finally, we got to do everything we can to help them be successful in life. Now, commitments go both ways. So for the student athlete, there needs to be a clear commitment as well. First and foremost, we got to make sure that student athletes understand that they're coming to college because they want to be in college, not at college, not because they're touching a base that they need to so they can get over to a professional sports league, that you're coming to college to be a college student. Now, let me be really clear. If a young man or young woman has the skill and ability to launch into a professional sport, God love them. I mean, who would deny them that incredible dream? But if they're going to come to us, we want them, all universities want them to be college students. We want them to be serious about being in college. I happen to believe that if someone doesn't want to go to college, they shouldn't have to go to college. We don't make ballet dancers go to college. We don't make writers go to college. We don't make musicians or artists or any other performers go to college if they don't want to. So if you don't want to come to college, we need to find ways for you to not have to go to college. If you want to go chase a professional sport dream, which is a wonderful thing. Tennis players, golfers, baseball players, they don't necessarily come to college. And that's fine. We still have great baseball and great golf and great tennis. Our goal isn't to have the best players on the field. It's to have the best college students on the field and on the court. And those are two different things. So when a student comes to one of our schools, they got to want to be in school, not at school. Second, they got to show up academically prepared. We've just raised our initial, since we last talked, we've raised our initial eligibility requirements so that you've got to have a higher grade point average, and you've got to have your sequencing of your curriculum in high school in a proper order that allows you to have a serious academic experience that prepares you for college. We got to make sure kids understand that if you're a basketball player, having a good left hand and a jump shot's not enough. You got to have math, English, and science too. And you got to be ready with that. And so we're working hard on it, but we've got to make sure the kids understand that, their parents understand it, their high school coaches, their AAU coach. Everybody's got to know that's part of the deal. And third, got to live by the rules. Got to follow the rules, got to be a good member of the community, you got to play consistent with the rules. That's your commitment. If the kids and student athletes that are coming in are committed to that, we got to be committed to delivering on the other side. In the vast majority of cases, that's all working remarkably well. And it shows up in continuing growth in graduation rates. We're going to be reporting shortly. When do we report this, Bob? Graduation rates. End of the month. We have early data, so I can't give you the hard data, but we're going to report that yet again the overall graduation rate moved up for all of our student athletes, and it moved up across all of our sports. And the data are showing yet again that student athletes are more successful academically than non-athletes at virtually every campus. It's very, very impressive. So we're not starting from a place where this is a train wreck. Quite the contrary. It's highly successful and we're really proud of it. We just need to make sure that everyone knows what our commitments are. We need to make sure that everyone knows that we want to make sure we, the NCAA, is an association of 1,100 universities and colleges, that we're making this kind of commitment to student athletes saying, you come and you participate, you follow the rules, you do these things, you're serious about being a student, we're going to deliver on your behalf. This is fundamentally different than the notion of student athletes being paid employees of a university. The notion of converting a student to a paid employee, particularly a unionized paid employee, is something that is utterly antithetical to the whole principle of intercollegiate athletics. If you converted student athletes to paid employees, it is highly unlikely that many schools would continue to participate at the levels that they do now, because why would they? If you're going to go out and hire a team, because that's what employment means, you hire somebody to put on your uniform to play a game for entertainment purposes alone, why would you even want him to be a student? If you want to hire a football player, by the way, why would you hire a 17-year-old? Why not somebody that just left the NFL? Why wouldn't you go to Canada and hire guys out of the Canadian League? And by the way, why would you want calculus to get in the way of football? If the goal is hire somebody to win a football game, what does that have to do with being a student athlete? Don't require any of your other employees to be students. Why would you require these employees to be students? So, I mean, it completely changes the entire notion of what college sports is all about. And so we're worried about, in the NCAA, with my board, my executive committee, all the presidents, all the ADs, we're trying to find a way to make sure that we can preserve what has become one of the most iconic things of America. Intercollegiate sports is a uniquely American phenomenon. The rest of the world doesn't do this. They look at us, frankly, and think we're crazy. But they also look at us and say, we think maybe this is part of the secret sauce of America. Your youngsters are better leaders. They're better entrepreneurs. They're better risk takers. They're better team players. They're more resilient. They're willing to try things that other countries and nationalities aren't as willing to try. And a lot of educators say to me, I think the fact that you Americans start playing sports as little kids has something to do with that. And I happen to agree with them. We're working very, very hard not to stay constant, but to stay true to those core values and to modify the model of intercollegiate athletics as it makes sense to create a new commitment in the 21st century that's still true to those core values. So that's what we're all about right now. Be happy to talk about all of the Sturm und Drang, I guess the Germans would say, or just the craziness, I might say, of what's going on in the intercollegiate athletic world. But let me pause and take questions. Okay? Thanks.
For reasons of security, of course, I am not mic'd, so just so you know. Where our kids are, they bring up the questions. We also have the official punch bowl, which, by the way, totally legit. We we bring 2 cards out. Put your business cards in there. You get a gift certificate from Let Us Entertain You. You get a Mariano's gift card for $100, and you get a skybox at the Bears game. Right? Thank you very much. Okay. Charlie Gardner, you always start off with a university trustee, especially when it's yours. Why should... Whoa, Charlie. Well, right off the bat, just raise your hand, Charlie, so he knows who's the guy giving him the sandbag. Why should Roosevelt University, which is in the NAIA, want even to aspire to be in the NCAA?
Well, I'm not the right person on stage to answer that question. Universities and colleges all have to decide what their relationship with sports is going to be and what they want from sports. One, if they want an athletic program, and then if they do, at what level they want to participate and what kind of an investment do they want to make. Because again, in all but a handful of cases, it's a financial investment and a policy commitment. So, later this afternoon, I'm going over to Chicago. Well, Chicago, as everybody here knows, once had one of the great football teams in America.
First Heisman Award winner.
First Heisman Award winner, Alonzo Stagg, God of football, we all get that. And then they made a decision, nah, that doesn't fit us. We're going to play Division III ball, which they do really well. And for them, that's the right fit. And so each school has to say, what kind of an investment do I want to make psychologically, financially, programmatically, and what fits our school, our students, and what our vision of the school is. I personally, now this is just Mark Emmert's view of the world, I think a lot of schools see participating in sport as a brand-building activity, which it can be. But if that's the only reason you're doing it, try to get your name out in the media, that's an insufficient reason. It's got to fit your students, it's got to fit where you want to go academically, it's got to fit your vision of where you want your school to be today and 20, 40 years from now. And it's a very individual choice, so I have no idea what Roosevelt wants to do.
Okay. Good answer. By the way, Mark, the clock is running.
I know.
We don't filibuster here.
I know. Okay.
Okay. I mean,
I should have just said beats me.
Okay. Brian Berg, where are you?
Back here.
Okay. Urban Partnership Bank. What is it? Urban what? I got it right. Why is it so important that athletes maintain amateur status when students already earn money in exchange for skills, research assistants, and internships?
Yeah.
Good question.
It is a good question. There's a lot of challenges in all of this, one of which is you've got to make sure that you are not creating perverse incentives around recruitment, because one of the things that college sports has that others don't is the notion of competing back and forth across schools, right? So it's sort of like the debate around that's very prominent right now around someone being able to sign their name, image, and likeness, or autographs and all of that stuff. We could debate all day long about the moral implications of that, which are complicated, and we've all have different views on it, I'm sure. But one of the practical implications is, do you sell autographs at school X because they've guaranteed that you're going to get $100,000 in school Y is guaranteeing $250,000? How does that model work when so you don't just have the blatant buying and selling of student athletes? The other component of it is that the presidents of universities right now have steadfastly said that they want to provide, as I was just describing, everything that a student athlete needs to be successful in school, and that they are playing their sport because they want to play their sport, and that this isn't about doing it because they need, that's not an inherent part of the athletic experience, that they're playing for pay, that they're participating because this is something they want to participate in. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming that that's what they want. All you have to do is look at how many young men and women are trying to get a D1 scholarship. They are, and so very, very few believe or think or desire to play professional sports. They want to play a continuation of their game. Someone becomes a TA or a research assistant in a PhD program. It's an integral part of that educational experience. They are playing, they're working in a laboratory because it's typically part of what they're doing with that professor in that research project, and they're almost always graduate assistants.
I'm glad to see you're cutting down the answers.
All right.
If I had a yellow flag, I'd have thrown it. Now,
delay a game.
Here is a question that's typed. Yes, I don't make this stuff up, but it's unsigned.
An impromptu typed question.
So if the person who typed it would raise their hand and say who they are, I'll read it. If not, it goes to the bottom of the barrel. Which question? I only have one. What is your response to those sports? Mike? Okay. Well, this is a good question, and because it's typed, Jay, I can read it. You're on the clock.
All right.
What is your response to those sports writers, doesn't mention you, Dave, you're okay, who argue that the NFL domestic violence abuse may be partly attributed to the lack of control the NCAA has over its so-called student athletes, where the major stars are coddled and indulged, while their unacceptable behavior goes unpunished as long as they perform on the field? You really thought about this, didn't you? The point being that these NFL domestic violence abusers are just continuing their unpunished behavior in college. A great sandbag question. Here you go.
No, I don't need the question.
You don't need it. All right.
I spent a lot of time thinking about it as a university president, not just in this job. So, look, domestic violence, sexual assault, relationship violence, all of that is a scourge on society. And I think anyone that tries to find a single causation for a very complex social phenomenon is not going to be very successful at it. Do I believe that universities and colleges have a particular responsibility? Yes, I do. I think that's the more important question. And I think that schools do a lot more in that arena than is typically seen and expected. So universities, first of all, unlike the NFL, universities have a very, very high degree of autonomy as they need to. You got 1,100 of them, not 32 clubs, 1,100 of them. They're responsible primarily for the behavior of all of their students, not just their athletes. So they're on the ground. We have a different set of responsibilities, and that is to help make sure that they're, first of all, providing education that students need about how to manage their own behavior, how to deal with drug and alcohol issues, how to engage in bystander intervention, because we know that's incredibly valuable in all of this, And then secondly, to make sure that they understand what the policies and practices have to be for dealing with allegations of any kind of misconduct, but particularly something as egregious as relationship or sexual assault violence. So the board of the NCAA has said you must have policies in place on any campus that make sure, first and foremost, that any student is treated the same. So if a student athlete is involved in an allegation, they're supposed to be treated exactly the same as a non-athlete on that campus. So if they're being, quote, coddled, or I've forgotten all your language, if in fact they are not being handled through the same process as a regular student is on that campus, then that institution is not following the policies that exist in NCAA guidelines, and they will wind up having to explain that. The whole notion of coddling individuals in any fashion, I'll leave to you to talk about where that begins and how it happens. I think it's an integral part of not just athletics, but a whole variety of things that are going on, and we as a society need to work on it together. We have a clear part and role to play in it. NFL does. They're working hard on it, obviously, and we got to work hard and harder on it. It's one of the things I've had a lot of attention focused on before we got here to this point in time, and we got to do more on campuses. We're working with the White House, working with all of our university partners, and working with a committee a working group that I put together in 2011.
Okay.
I know I'm trying to be short, but these are good questions.
Hey, Heider, you can see political science, MP. Just some of us understand. Okay. Al Manning, where are you? There he is. Great City Club member. This is a sports question.
Good.
Please elaborate on, I'm not saying it's not a sandbag there, Mark. Please elaborate on the new scholarship distinction between the top 5 conferences and all the others. What is the long-term effect?
Yeah, so today there's no difference. For those of you that have followed this, the 5 high-resource conferences, that's Pac-12, ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, those 5 conferences were granted, all of the decision-making in the NCAA is made through a group of representative bodies that looks like state government. I know that's a frightening thought, but that's kind of how it looks. People, it's easy and sometimes fun to attribute all of the bad decisions to me. I don't even have a vote in this process. The same thing about punishments that are passed out. They're all done by committees and basically juries of your peer. I don't have the authority to do any of that. It's all managed through this representative process. In August, all the Division I schools, about 350 of them, gave the 65 universities in the Big 5 conferences autonomy to settle among themselves to change the rules about many of the things I was discussing. Whether or not they can give a full cost of attendance scholarship, whether or not they can change a handful of issues around those things, only those things. They can't change the rules of football. They can't change the number of scholarships that you can have on a football team, none of that. But they can liberalize some of the rules around what a student athlete can get in support, not pay for play, but some of those things. If and when they do that, the first chance they'll have to do that's January. If they do that, any of those rules would apply to anybody in Division I, but they wouldn't be mandatory. So if a Division I, if for example they say, yes, you can increase the size of a scholarship to full cost of attendance, which would add a couple $1,000s typically to a scholarship. If a school that's not in the Big 5 wanted to do that, they're free to do it, but they don't have to. Okay?
All right, this is a very quick question from a young man from Cristo Rey Jesuit High School, Ryan Daly. Where are you, Ryan? There he is.
Hey, Ryan.
You mentioned only 22 schools have financially self-sustainable athletic systems.
Yeah.
Do you feel some of the premier coaches are earning too large a salary, especially at those 3% schools?
Yeah, so...
Easy, Charlie.
Sure. First of all, the marketplace has always bewildered me, even as a guy who's studied economics a good bit. But here's the reality. The reality is the market takes them where it takes them, and the NCAA does not have any legal, or the conference, or even anybody in the governance system doesn't have any legal capacity to control that. So and this has been settled as a matter of law. So when did we have the restricted earnings football coaches, Gene? You went?
Late 80s, early.
Yeah, in the late 80s, the NCAA put in place a rule to have, they were called restricted earnings coaches. So there were assistant coaches that they added to the, restricted coaches they added to football coaching staff requirements, and they said, but they can only earn, I forget what the amount was, $25,000, $50,000. Class action lawsuit came in, sued, won, wound up settling for like $60 million. And so all the legal precedent says the NCAA has no capacity to control coaches' salaries. Only universities can control those salaries.
Okay. Now we have a...
And individual schools decide it's worth it.
Well, I know why you're talking, because these next two questions. What's the nickname of the Penn State team? Nittany Lion. Well, we have a couple of lions in this audience.
I would be shocked if it were otherwise.
Be prepared. Strap up. Father, you may need to be involved in this. Tim Murray, the president of Easter Seals of Metropolitan Chicago. Tim, where you are. And we have George Middlemass. There you go. PSU 68, babe. Basically, I could read all this, but I think the bottom line is, why did the NCAA play a role in defaming the name of Joe Paterno?
Oh, it's a really good question because it's absolutely untrue.
Moving on.
No, this is really, really important because there's some fascinating near-term revisionist history going on. The NCAA, the board, the executive committee, and I personally went out of our ways to never mention an individual in any of those affairs. There's this interesting notion, and people forget, it was the university that fired him. It was the university that took down his statue. It was the university that accepted a report that said a variety of things. The NCAA never has ever mentioned Coach Paterno. 24 months before that, I gave Coach Paterno the Ford Award, which is personally on stage at our national convention, which is the highest award the NCAA has to offer anybody for a lifetime of commitment. But somehow there's become this notion that the NCAA has gone out of its way to defame Coach Paterno, which is absolutely, utterly false.
I just moved out of the...
Absolutely.
I just moved out of the way because...
But I don't think those are the two things. I think Penn State's one thing, and I think Mr. Paterno's another. Some people disagree with that.
Okay.
Because...
Why did they take away their victories? That's the question? Well, let's just be the final one on Penn State. We have two more questions, and this could get rowdy, so go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Because again, this is the executive committee of the association, which is a group of university presidents from across America. The executive committee felt strongly that had the university handled all of those affairs appropriately from the very beginning, based upon all the information that the university provided to the executive committee, that it would have impacted their success on the field, and therefore they had a competitive advantage. Now, we could debate all day long whether that was right or wrong, but that's what the conclusion was. You'll notice for the Penn Staters and the non-Penn Staters, the other thing that didn't get much attention that was a really good tool, I think, was that same body said, look, let's put in place an athletic integrity agreement that says going forward, the university needs to put in place the following kinds of systems to deal with inappropriate behavior. Penn State has done what can only be described as an exemplary job. It was a 5-year game plan. We hired Senator George Mitchell to monitor it, much like a corporate integrity agreement's done. And to do it over 5 years, the university has virtually completed it in 2 years. The executive committee, seeing that performance, said, this is fantastic. Let's give them back some of the relief, relieve them from some of the burdens that they were put under. Immediately gave them back scholarships, and then this year, a month ago, they gave them back bowl eligibility. And I was very supportive of those moves because Penn State's done everything that it should do, and its board, by the way, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of its board has been incredibly supportive of that process. And so I had someone a day ago, a reporter asked me, who's got the best compliance program in America? And I said, probably Penn State, because they've done a great job.
Okay, I know we're not going to resolve that one. We have two more questions, by the way, and this one is a quickie. June Brown, where are you, June? City Club member?
Hey, June.
Okay. I'll just make this short. What happened to the National Youth Sports Program? Will it return?
I don't know.
Okay, good. Fair question.
I don't know what transpired with it. I'm sorry. So I can't answer the second question.
Okay, to close, I'm sorry, some of the questions, we just don't have enough time, and some of them are similar to what's been asked, especially about the early responses. A young Fitz Roebling, where are you, young man? That's the Roebling with hair.
Dark hair.
And there's the other question from some guy named Paul Green. He's a really dapper fella. But they're somewhat similar. What commitment should the coaches be required to make to their schools and the students who they recruited? Should they lose a year of coaching when they what's that? Should they lose?
When they leave.
Yeah, when they leave.
Yeah.
When they leave?
Yeah, I think this is a really complicated, it's a great question with a complicated answer, I think. So one of the other big debates that we all get into is about transferability of student athletes, right? So the general rule for transferability in Division I is if you transfer, you have to sit out a season, and then you can gain eligibility after the season, and you don't lose. You get to continue to play. But coaches can move about relatively freely. First of all, they can't move as freely sometimes as people think. Most coaches in major programs have buyout clauses, so they've got to pay money. So the other university either pays the buyout money or sometimes the coach, depending on the circumstance. So the universities themselves have to put some kind of either golden handcuffs or buyout clause in the contract to make it less desirable. But the university's got a problem then. You know, keeping a coach who doesn't want to be there is not exactly a great circumstance either. So it's hard to do that. Coaches are professionals. They want to advance, and everybody understands they have opportunities, and they do it. And a lot of people change jobs in their careers, and that's not uncommon. I think, now this is just Mark Emmert, and I have no idea how many of our members agree with this, and it's the members that make the rules, not me. I think that under circumstances where a coach changes and they were recruited by that coach, I think there ought to be pretty good flexibility for a student athlete to change a school if they need to. I think that's pretty fair. You get recruited by, you're going to a school, so you're committed to that school, but you're also basically recruited by that coach, that program, and if a program change occurs and you don't fit that scheme or that program anymore, I would love to see more flexibility and the ability for students to move. But it's complicated.
Okay, last question from me, because we did this 2 years ago. Is the term, you will now, is the term student athlete becoming an oxymoron? One and done. And why can't NCAA basketball, why can't it be like football, where you must complete at least your sophomore year, given the fact that if you're recruited like these coaches, who recruit a top athlete who you know is going to be there 1 year, that person never has to go to class. Because if he's suspended, big deal. Why can't we mandate that they either have to go to class or wait until their end of their sophomore year to go pro? 25 words or less. No.
I agree with you, but it's not our rule, right? So the rule is the NBA's rule. The reason that someone has to stay in school if they're a football player is because of the NFL. It's the NFL that says you got to stay 3 years or be 21. In baseball, you can go on to high school, but if you start college, Major League Baseball says you got to stay 3 years or be 21. The NBA, a number of years ago, remember LeBron, Kobe, they came out of high school, right? And then, I don't remember when, 2005 or something like that, the NBA put in a rule that said, nope, you got to be 19 or go to college a year. So the NBA created that phenomenon. Adam Silver, great guy, Adam Silver has said he wants to change it. The owners tell me all the time they want to change it, but it's in the contract between the players' union, and it's a negotiation in a labor contract. So it's the players' union and the owners that have to negotiate it out. The players' union has not had an interest in changing that heretofore. We work hard with them. And I would love it because I think the whole one and done is ridiculous notion. That, as I said, if somebody can play ball and they can go out of high school, they ought to be allowed to go. The only thing I would correct is if you don't go to class and you just drop out, that school will in fact especially if your whole team leaves, if they were never academically eligible, because it affects what we call our APR score, and odds are they won't be eligible for the tournament in subsequent years. So they do need to make sure that a kid goes to class. They do need to make sure that they maintain their academic eligibility.
Well, that's fine, and 2 years from now when you're back, I'll bring up things like, why don't we see their grade point averages if they have to go to class? But I'm not going to say that now. That'll be from 2 years. How about a big round of applause?
Thank you.
Great
Thank you.
job.
It's great to be with you again. Thanks.